everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the brand new DuckTales series on Disney XD. I watched the premiere last night with my cousins, and I have to say, we all really enjoyed it. I didn't really know what I was going to think about it, but I knew I was excited. I wasn't one of those people who actually grew up with the series. We didn't have the Disney Channel when I was a kid, so the only time I actually got to watch the show was when I went to visit my grandparents or when I went to visit my uncle. I did have DuckTales the movie, The Treasure of the Lost Lamp, on VHS, and that was because my uncle taped it off the Disney Channel for me. So we knew the movie a whole lot more than we knew the series itself. But I was enough of a fan of the series to be excited when I heard it was coming back. And the more I heard about the show, the more excited I was. For starters, the show is not going to be only based on the old DuckTales cartoon. It's also going to be based on the comics and graphic novels by artists like Carl Barks and Don Rosa. These artists have been doing these comic books for years. They're apparently very popular in Europe, but for some reason they've never caught on in the States. Apparently these stories are all really great, so I'm excited to see what inspiration the writers of this new series take from these comic books. And speaking of comic books, the style of this show is very reminiscent of comic books. Just about everything on this show looks like it was taken straight out of a comic book. From the designs to the backgrounds to the sketchy style of a lot of the objects, right down to the halftone dot patterns used for shading. They put so much detail into this cartoon. I am just so impressed by how it looks. Another great thing about this series is the voice cast. I was absolutely shocked when I found out that David Tennant, the 10th Doctor from Doctor Who, was going to be voicing Scrooge McDuck. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how absolutely perfect he is for the role. For starters, David Tennant is actually Scottish, so there will be no need to fake an accent for it. He absolutely owns this role, and I love him as Scrooge. David Tennant is not the only big star in this series. For the nephews, we have Danny Pudi as Huey. I watched him earlier this year on the show Powerless, which was a little bit disappointing, but he was great in the show. I got enough of a feel of who Danny Pudi was that I was excited to hear he was going to be on DuckTales. For Dewey, we have Ben Schwartz, who I know as John Ralphio from Parks and Recreation. He was one of my absolute favorite recurring characters on that show. He was utterly insane, over the top, so hilarious. I was really excited to hear that he was going to be on the show, and so far, Dewey is shaping up to be my favorite of the three brothers. For Louie, we have Bobby Moynihan, who most people probably know him from SNL, but I don't really watch Saturday Night Live save for a clip or two here and there on YouTube. I'm more familiar with him as Panda from the show We Bare Bears. It's another cartoon I really like, so I was excited to hear that he was going to be in another series that I'd be watching. Another Saturday Night Live player we have is Beck Bennett as Launchpad McQuack. I'm not familiar with him in anything else. I don't think I'd ever heard of him before this show, so I have no preconceived notions about him, but I think he's doing a great job and I enjoy his take on the character. Another person I was not really familiar with before this show is Tokes Olagundoye. I don't know much about her, but I think she's got a great voice for Mrs. Beakley. She sounds like the perfect, no-nonsense British nanny. Rounding out the cast playing Mrs. Beakley's granddaughter Webby Vanderquack is Kate Micucci, who I absolutely love. She always plays crazy characters who are just sort of a little out there. She has the perfect voice for that. This version of Webby seems a little more like maybe a combination of Dipper and Mabel from Gravity Falls. Sort of the weirdness of Mabel and the intense theorizing of Dipper. She's a great character and I love her in this series. She's probably shaping up to be my favorite character. And speaking of Gravity Falls, this show reminds me a lot of Gravity Falls. I said to my cousins when we were done watching it that this show might actually be the show to help fill the void that Gravity Falls has left. Gravity Falls was probably my all-time favorite cartoon. I have so many cartoons I really like. But Gravity Falls was just everything that I love in storytelling, in animation, in cartoons, in characters. I don't know yet because I've only seen one episode, but so far DuckTales really seems to be taking a page out of the Gravity Falls handbook, or the Gravity Falls journal. Webby isn't the only character to get a little bit of a makeover. Huey, Dewey, and Louie have all been significantly revamped for this series. When I was a kid, I had no idea which one was which. They all were basically the same character with a different shirt on. But in this series, you actually get to know all three as different characters. Huey's the oldest, he wears red. He's like a by-the-book rules follower. Then we have Dewey, who is the middle child, and he's basically the stereotypical middle child. He's always trying to be the center of attention. And Louis is the youngest. He's sort of lazy, and when Webby asks the triplets which one is the evil triplet, the older two point to him, and he just sort of shrugs and accepts it. So as far as this first episode goes, we learn that Donald is in charge of his three nephews. He's sort of acting in the guardian role. The three nephews are kind of running Donald ragged, and he's trying to get a new job, and he's reluctant to leave them alone because they live in a houseboat and they act like they're going to take the houseboat out for a joyride. With no babysitter and no backup plan, he decides he has to take them to stay with his Uncle Scrooge. And from the dialogue here, we kind of learn that they have not seen each other in 10 years, and there has been some sort of a falling out. We don't really know what happened here. It's not explained, but I'm hoping that that'll be something that comes up later in the show. Scrooge is very reluctant to interact with his nephews because they are peppering him with all these annoying questions, and basically they're asking him what happened, because he used to be some sort of a great adventurer, a hero in the past, and for some reason he isn't anymore. Eventually he takes them away and puts them in an empty room with a bag of marbles. And they're not going to have this, so they escape the room. But as soon as one of them sets foot outside the door, they're captured by Webby, who has mistaken them for intruders. As soon as she learns who they are, she lets them go and is extremely excited because she has made it her life's obsession to research Scrooge and his family. She immediately is asking if they can be best friends. Eventually she takes them on a tour through the house. They're going to find a secret wing of the house that's filled with old treasures of Scrooge's adventures. Meanwhile, Scrooge is just in a state because of what the nephew said to him, and to top it all off, he's heard this story about snow on the Drake Barrier Reef. This is leading him to believe that this ancient prophecy about a path to Atlantis could be true. So between the boys asking why he isn't this great adventurer anymore, and this new adventure seemingly being dropped in his lap, he decides he's going to go out and rediscover the hero that he once was. In the treasure room, the kids find a painting that depicts Donald as Uncle Scrooge's sidekick, and the kids just will not believe this. They don't believe that Donald was ever some sort of great explorer because they've never seen this trait in him before. They don't believe that anything in the room is real until they accidentally start awakening ancient artifacts and evil spirits. There's like a living sword and a ghost of a dead pirate and the headless man horse, which was ridiculous. All of these things decide to team up against the boys, but suddenly Uncle Scrooge appears and he saves the day. Unfortunately, their victory is short-lived because Scrooge accidentally awakens one more thing, a giant gold-hunting dragon. And if you know anything about DuckTales, you know that Scrooge McDuck has a giant money bin full of gold. Scrooge grabs the dragon's tail so that he can chase after it. They go find Launchpad, and they all follow him in a plane. This actually comes in handy because they end up having to save him, and Webby saves the day by suggesting that they use one of the ancient artifacts, which Louis has apparently stolen, and has with him a Medusa gauntlet, which is this glove that can turn things to stone. So Scrooge takes the gauntlet and uses it on the dragon and saves his money bin before it's completely destroyed. When they're finally back on the ground, it seems like Scrooge is really mad at the boys, but then you realize that he's actually really happy. He's excited that he's been able to go on another adventure, and he decides that the boys are now going to come with him on his Atlantis expedition. Meanwhile, while all this was going on, Donald was still at his job interview. He had one of his famous temper tantrum freakouts and ended up stapling himself to the wall. And while we were watching, I said, well, there's no way he's going to get this job now. I was completely wrong, though, because it turns out the person doing the job interview was one of Scrooge's sworn enemies. Unbeknownst to Donald, Donald did not know this, Flintheart Glomgold, he wants to use Donald to help him get to Atlantis before Scrooge does. He's hired Donald as a sailor, and he's hired a bunch of other crew to come with them. So this group all sets out in a boat, while Scrooge, his nephews, and Launchpad, along with Webby, all take the route through the sea in a submarine. Scrooge has their trip mapped out, but Dewey thinks that the map is wrong because it's going to take them the long way around. What he seems to not be paying attention to, though, is the fact that this is going the long way around to avoid several monsters that are living under the sea. So while Launchpad is not looking, he takes the map, redraws the route, and they end up facing off against all these monsters anyway. After they escape, one of the monsters has apparently become lodged in their toilet, so they have to stop somewhere for a bathroom break. The only thing nearby is what seems to be an abandoned ship, but the ship is not abandoned because that's where Glomgold is with his crew. They're using the bathroom on the deck, but Glomgold and Donald and everybody else is down below watching through security cameras. Donald is of course horrified to see that his nephews are out at sea because he expects them to be safe at home. And Glomgold, seeing that Scrooge is so close to them, decides that instead of going and getting the treasure before Scrooge, he's going to follow Scrooge and just steal it from him. Donald, of course, can't say anything about this because he thinks that Glomgold doesn't know who he is, and he has to stay silent in order to protect his family. When they eventually do get to Atlantis, this becomes a real problem because Donald is trying to sneak off and protect his family from all the booby traps, while also dealing with all of Glomgold's crew, who also have it out for his family. Meanwhile, Dewey is being the quintessential middle child, running on ahead, misbehaving, running through all the booby traps. Dewey, Scrooge, and Donald end up separated from everybody else when they are cornered by Glomgold. Glomgold gets what he thinks he's come for, which is a giant ruby that he says is the jewel of Atlantis, and he tosses Donald into the treasure room with Scrooge and Dewey, and sets off another booby trap, which fills the room with water. Somewhere in here they figure out that the red ruby was not actually the jewel of Atlantis. It was actually this big crystal that was hanging on the ceiling, so when the water gets high enough, they pull out the crystal, which deactivates the booby trap, draining out the water and letting them go free. Meanwhile, Glomgold has abandoned his crew, left them there to fight the rest of Scrooge's family, who were in the other room, and he's going to blow up Atlantis with his crew and everybody still inside just because he wants to kill Scrooge. They all make it back to Scrooge's submarine in the nick of time, with Glomgold's crew asking if they can bomb a ride off him. And when they finally get back to Duckburg, they get there just in time to interrupt Glomgold's press conference, where he's announcing that he is now the richest Scottish duck in the world. Scrooge tells him that no, he's not. In fact, that's not even the real jewel of Atlantis. This crystal is the real jewel of Atlantis, and it's actually capable of powering Duckburg for the next 50 years. Glomgold is flabbergasted to see this, and even more so when Scrooge tells him that the thing he has is actually super cursed, and then he's grabbed by this giant tentacle from the ocean and dragged away. After that, there's a little reconciliation scene with Donald, Scrooge, and the nephews, and behind them we see Donald's houseboat, which explodes. It bursts into flames, leaving them homeless. And of course, Scrooge tells them, "Oh, well, I've got all these extra rooms in my mansion, you guys can come stay with me." The last scene of the show shows Donald and Launchpad putting what's left of the houseboat into Scrooge's swimming pool in the yard, and the boys and Webby are all playing in the house. Dewey is cleaning up the room with all the artifacts, which turned out to be the garage, and he sees the painting again, the one with Scrooge and Donald fighting pirates. And he notices that there's a corner of the painting that's sort of torn and folded over. He lifts it up and sees another duck in the corner. He looks at it in awe and says, "Mom?" And that's where the show ends. I thought that was an amazing way to end this show because I have said for years I wanted to know what happened to their parents, and it looks like we're finally going to get an answer to that. Between that and whatever happened in the past with Donald and Scrooge giving up being an adventurer, we're going to have some overarching mysteries. I really like the fact that they're adding these serialized elements into the show. Gravity Falls, Star vs. the Forces of Evil, even Wonder Over Yonder in its second season. These are all really great shows that Disney XD has put out, and they have all incorporated some form of serialization. It really helps to set the show apart from anything else that's airing. And while I love cartoons that are just silly and cartoony, I grew up with Looney Tunes, the old Disney cartoons, Animaniacs, none of them had any continuity, and I like them just fine. But I find that the ones that have the serialized elements, the overarching narratives, they get me more engaged with the show. They keep me coming back. They keep me asking questions. They keep me wondering what's going to happen next. And I love that DuckTales is going to do that as well. Well, I think that's all for today. I'll be back Wednesday with another Wonderland Wednesday. And in the future, I may keep doing these reviews of DuckTales. If the show retains this level of good storytelling and has enough stuff that I'll want to discuss about it, I will keep reviewing this show. I don't think there's going to be any new episodes airing until next month, but as soon as it's back, I'm sure I'm going to want to talk about it. So I'll see you then. Bye!